So another one that obviously came up when we're doing rapture or tribulation.
Yes.
What's the millennium?
Yeah, so this we can be quick on, I think, hopefully. I say that, but then I'm not. So the millennium refers to how you understand Revelation chapter 20, which speaks of Satan being bound for 1,000 years.
Yeah, what's that all about?
Yeah, it only comes from there. And then after the 1,000 years, he seems to be released from his cage, and he wreaks some final havoc and then is destroyed, right? And this issue, I want to stress that you can hold to any of the common views on the millennium and still read Revelation well. This is not a big deal. In recent American history, it has been a big deal, right? Your view on the millennium has been a litmus test of orthodoxy in some places, unfortunately. But yeah, you can read Revelation well and hold to different views. So the three main views have been that first, that this period of time is a literal period of time, whether it's exactly 1,000 years or it stands for a different period of time, whatever. But it's a specific period of time that comes. So premillennialism means that Jesus returns first, and then there's this 1,000-year reign of prosperity with him ruling on this earth before the final judgment and the new heavens and new earth. So Jesus is ruling on the current sort of unrestored earth. And then at the end of that, Satan comes back out, and then everything's finally destroyed and renewed. So that's premillennialism. There have been some people who've held that throughout church. Well, especially in the early church, there were people who held a version of that, but it's not been the dominant view in church history. Then dispensationalism came along with its own version of this. That's when the rapture, all gets tied into, and the literal tribulation, all that kind of stuff gets tied into this, and that then became the dominant view in the United States. So that's that. Postmillennialism is like a really interesting one. I still think you have to have a certain temperament, very optimistic temperament.
But it was a big thing back in the day.
It was, yeah.
Really interesting.
So postmillennialism is the idea that, again, there's the 1,000 years. It's not a literal 1,000 years, but it represents this period of time where the current earth the gospel will have triumphed. And, people, the earth as the current society will have become largely Christianized and will be, basically Christian, and everything will be awesome before Jesus returns. So it's just that the gospel advances and everyone people just keep getting saved and like stuff gets better. And then at the sort of the grand finale of that, Jesus returns. And that view has been held by some significant people, Jonathan Edwards, B.B. Warfield, et cetera. It seems to have fallen out of fashion around World War I.
That would make sense.
Everyone got depressed with how terrible things were. So, So that is that. Then the final major position, there is another position that's been advocated more recently called New Creation Millennialism, but we won't get into that. But the final position, which has been the dominant position in the history of the church, is amillennialism, the a meaning no. But it doesn't mean that it's kind of a misnomer because it doesn't mean that there's no millennium, but it understands that what Revelation's talking about, this 1,000-year period where Satan is bound, it understands that as referring to this whole era between Jesus' ascension, basically, and his return. So between Pentecost and Jesus' return, that whole era is this period.
Okay. And that would have been a fairly common view in, like, say, the early church, for example.
Yes,
and
I think that was the more common view in the early church, I think. But then it became the dominant view kind of once Augustine changed, I think Augustine changed his mind in favor of this view, and then it kind of became the dominant view, as most things, whatever Augustine believed kind of became the dominant vw for a long time.
He had a lot of influence.
He did, yeah.
So those are kind of the three main ones to keep in mind.
It is, yeah. Now, what's weird is that people could say, like, how Satan being bound, that just seems bonkers. Like, how can that refer to this whole era when you've also just said this is the time when the beast reigns and all this kind of stuff, right?
Yeah.
Right. So I think the key understanding here is that Revelation 20 speaks of Satan being bound so that he might not deceive the nations any longer. To me, that's the key part of that, right? And when you look at the history of what God has been trying to do in the world, from creation to or from the fall, let's say, to now in redemptive history, Pentecost marks this moment where from then on the gospel has like exploded. Okay, there's been highs and lows, but the people from all over the world are believing God in Israel's God and submit to Jesus now, like in ways that before Jesus coming were not the case, right? There was this one little camp, Israel, who had the knowledge of God, and the rest, like, so Paul says, these times of ignorance God winked at, he overlooked, right? But now he commands all people everywhere to repent. And so amillennialism says, yes, the devil, sure, there is one, taken from one angle, the devil has lots of power and he's doing all sorts of crazy stuff. The beast is very much roaming. But from another angle, Satan's ability to keep the gospel from it spreading to the nations has been curtailed in a way, right? We have like the way the gospel has spread in the last couple thousand years, the reason any of us are sitting here just obviously assuming that the Bible, that we have a direct relationship to Yahweh through Jesus. I mean, that's so unheard of in the Old Testament, right? And it's only when the Spirit is poured out that this changed, and you start having people from the nations that embrace the true God. So that's the understanding of how that works, and then they say, well, so that's what that means. And then right when Jesus comes back, the devil will do his last to try to bring everyone in rebellion against God, and Jesus will triumph. That's a summary, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's okay. That actually it does kind of make sense when you think about it. Like they do have some points there, about the gospel spreading to every corner of the globe, which is true, and the growth of the church that we've seen in the last 2,000 years. Fascinating.
Yeah. So all views, you can have. I think postmillennialism is the least plausible to me. I lean amillennial, but I think that all of these views have their weaknesses too, right? And so I think we don't want, because it's mostly just a matter of interpreting one chapter of Revelation, this doctrine doesn't show up other places. It's one of the reasons I'm hesitant to say, this is definitely teaching a literal millennium, because I'm like, it's nowhere else in the Bible. And Revelation speaks in figures and imagery. So it's, it's something that we certainly shouldn't make a big issue out of. But that's kind of an overview of the views, and